A billionaire hotel mogul told his 7-year-old daughter to pick a new nanny from a lineup of polished, credentialed women, and she walked straight past all of them to hand her cookie to the janitor scrubbing the lobby floor. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And when the story's over, rate it from 0 to 10. Now, let's get into it. For as long as anyone at Aldridge Hotels could remember, Bennett Aldridge had run his empire the same way he ran his personal life. With precision, minimal sentiment, and an exit strategy already mapped before anyone else saw the door. He was 41, built like someone who still made time for the gym, despite running a company with properties in 12 cities, and he wore the kind of quiet authority that made assistants walk faster when he came down the hallway. His father had built the first Aldridge Hotel from a single motor lodge in Reno. Bennett had turned it into a brand that hung on plaques in airports. What his father could never have predicted was that the thing to finally crack Bennett Aldridge open would not be a competitor, a market crash, or a bad press cycle. It would be a 7-year-old girl named Josie. Josie was his daughter. She had her mother's stubborn chin and Bennett's gray eyes, and she had been living with him full-time for 11 months. Ever since her mother, his ex-wife Margot, had taken a consulting position in Dubai and decided, with the casual cruelty only very beautiful and very self-absorbed people can manage, that Josie would be better off staying in Chicago with her father. Bennett had agreed before he fully understood what that meant. What it meant was, breakfast before 7, a car seat that took 4 tries to buckle correctly, a small person who needed to know why the sky was blue, and whether clouds felt anything, and if dogs dreamed, all before 8 in the morning when he had a call with Singapore. He had gone through 3 nannies in 11 months. The first left after Josie glued her certification binder shut with craft paste. The second quit when Josie convinced her that the hotel's kitchen cat, a gray tabby named Crouton who was absolutely not supposed to be in the residence wing, was actually a licensed therapy animal who needed to sleep in the bed. The third one lasted 6 weeks and handed in her notice with the expression of someone who had survived something. His assistant, a brisk and competent woman named Fran who had worked for him for 9 years and whom he trusted with approximately everything, put a folder on his desk one morning with the words "nanny situation" written on the tab in her precise handwriting. 5 candidates, Fran said. All vetted, all credentialed, 2 with graduate degrees in early childhood development. Schedule interviews, Bennett said without looking up. I already did. Saturday morning, here at the hotel. I thought, given the circumstances, Josie should be present for the final selection. He looked up then. Josie, she's the one who has to live with this person, Fran said, with the particular diplomacy of someone who had watched 3 nannies leave in under a year. It seems relevant. So on a Saturday in early March, with gray Chicago light coming through the tall lobby windows of Aldridge Grand, 5 women sat in a row of chairs near the concierge desk, each with a folder of references and the careful posture of people auditioning for something they very much wanted to get. Josie sat beside her father in a velvet armchair that was slightly too big for her, wearing her dinosaur sneakers and eating a shortbread cookie from the afternoon tea service, watching the women with the calm, unsettling assessment of someone twice her age. The interviews proceeded. There was a woman with a laminated activity schedule and a philosophy about sensory play. There was a woman with a British accent who had cared for the children of 2 ambassadors. There was a woman who brought a portfolio. Josie said nothing during any of it, just kept eating her cookie and watching. When the 5th interview ended, Bennett turned to his daughter. So, what do you think? Josie looked at the 5 women. She looked at her cookie. She slid off the velvet chair, walked directly past all 5 candidates, past the laminated schedule and the ambassador references and the portfolio, across the marble lobby floor, and crouched down next to a woman who was on her hands and knees cleaning a scuff mark off the baseboard near the elevator bank. The woman looked up, startled. She was young, late 20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back under a maintenance cap, wearing a gray uniform with the Aldridge Hotel's logo on the chest. She had a small smudge of cleaning solution on her cheek and the wary expression of someone who has learned not to make eye contact with guests. Josie held out the last piece of her cookie. You look hungry, Josie said. I'm Josie. What's your name? The young woman blinked. Petra. My name is Petra. Do you like dinosaurs? Yes, actually. Pterodactyls are technically not dinosaurs, which most people don't know. Josie's eyes went wide. I know. She spun around to look at her father, across the lobby. Dad, her. She knows about pterodactyls. The 5 candidates turned to look at the woman on the floor. Petra looked like she wanted to dissolve into the baseboard she'd just cleaned. Bennett stood up slowly. He was not a man who was often caught genuinely off guard. He stood there for a moment, doing the particular calculation of a man whose 7-year-old has just blown up his entire morning. Fran, standing 2 steps behind him, said nothing. But he could hear her not saying it very loudly. Josie, he said carefully. She works here. She's not a nanny candidate. She could be, Josie said, with the unshakable confidence of someone who has never once been told the world doesn't work the way she thinks it does. She was nice and she knows real facts. The other ones smiled like this. Josie demonstrated a wide, stiff smile that bore no relationship to actual human warmth. Petra had gotten to her feet and was now gripping her cleaning cloth like it might protect her. Sir, I apologize, I wasn't trying to. I'll get back to. What's your name? Bennett heard himself say, Petra Voss, sir. I've been with Aldridge Grand for almost 2 years. Facilities and interiors. I really wasn't trying to interrupt your. Have you worked with children? Petra paused. Something flickered across her face. Not reluctance, but something more careful. I have. Before this, I was a classroom aide for 2 years at Northside Elementary. Before that, I helped run an after-school program in Pilsen. Bennett looked at Fran. Fran looked at her notepad and wrote something. I'm not offering you anything, Bennett said, which was true. But come by HR on Monday. Fran will leave your name. Petra looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not gratitude, not excitement. Something more measured than either. Okay, she said. Just that. On the way up in the elevator, Josie held his hand and said, Dad, I think that went really well. I'm glad you think so, he said. You should give her the cookie job. The job doesn't involve cookies. Every job should involve cookies, Josie said, with the authority of someone settling a matter of policy. Petra Voss showed up on Monday with a folder of her own. Not a laminated one. A plain manila folder with her previous employer's contact information, a letter from the principal at Northside Elementary, and a handwritten note from a parent whose son she had worked with in the after-school program. The note said, She was the first person my son ever trusted. Bennett read that line twice. He told Fran to run a background check, which came back clean. He told himself this was a practical decision. A trial period, 2 weeks, room in the hotel's residential wing included since the position required overnights, and a salary that was, he could admit, on the high end. Because he had been through 3 nannies and he understood now that this was not a role for someone who needed protecting from Josie. What he did not tell himself, or Fran, or anyone, was that he had found something disconcerting about the way Petra Voss had looked at him in the lobby. Not with deference, not with the carefully calibrated warmth of someone who wanted something from him. Just level, like she was reading the situation and making her own conclusions. He wasn't used to that. Petra arrived on a Wednesday evening with 1 bag, a canvas tote of books, and the unsurprised air of someone who has moved around enough that new places don't unsettle her. The residential suite was enormous by any normal standard. She stood in the doorway and said, very quietly, This is bigger than my last 3 apartments combined, and then walked in and set her bag down like she lived there. Josie was already waiting for her, sitting on the kitchen counter in pajamas that had planets on them. I saved you a cookie, she announced. From Saturday? No, a new one. I told the kitchen it was for scientific research. Petra looked at her. Does scientific research often involve cookies? In this house it does, Josie said solemnly. That was the beginning. In the days that followed, Petra rearranged the way Josie's mornings worked, not with a laminated schedule, but with a kind of intuitive structure that made Josie feel like things were happening rather than being enforced. She discovered that Josie would eat breakfast without argument if she got to pick the music. She discovered that Josie's meltdowns before school were almost always about something small that felt insurmountable. A tag on her shirt, a word she couldn't spell, a worry she hadn't been able to put words to yet, and that the trick was not to redirect them but to sit down on the floor next to her and wait. Bennett came home on the 4th night to find Josie asleep on the living room couch with a picture book open on her chest, and Petra sitting at the kitchen table reading a worn paperback, a mug of tea gone cold at her elbow. The whole apartment had the particular quiet of a place where a child has recently been very happy and then very tired. He stood in the doorway. Petra looked up. "She went down about 20 minutes ago," Petra said. "We built a scale model of the solar system out of fruit from the kitchen bowl. Jupiter was a grapefruit. Josie informed me that Pluto deserved better and staged a small protest." Bennett looked at his daughter's sleeping face. Something in his chest moved that he didn't immediately name. "She do that a lot?" he asked. "The protests?" "She has strong opinions about things that are treated unfairly," Petra said, and went back to her book. He wanted to say something else. He didn't. He carried Josie to her room and stood in the hall for a moment after, listening to his own hotel breathe around him. On the 9th day, things complicated themselves. Her name was Camille, and she arrived at the hotel restaurant, where Bennett was having a working dinner on a Tuesday, wearing a burgundy dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the particular confidence of a woman who had grown up being told she was the most interesting person in any room. Camille Whitfield was the daughter of a family that owned a regional media group, the kind of person his father's business circles had always called suitable, and she had been pursuing Bennett Aldridge with the organized efficiency of someone running a campaign. They had been on 4 dinners. He was still deciding what he thought. Camille had a way of discussing Josie that he had noticed but not yet resolved, a light, pleasant dismissiveness, the way people discuss traffic. A brief inconvenience. He told himself he was being unfair. She hadn't met Josie yet. The next evening she came for dinner at the hotel suite. His idea, actually, an attempt to change that. And the encounter lasted approximately 12 minutes before Camille announced that Josie's table manners were something to work on, and suggested that perhaps a more structured environment, she said the words with the careful vagueness of someone who means boarding school, would help Josie reach her potential. Josie, who was 7 and sharp as a tack, said nothing. But after Camille moved to the living room with her wine, Josie came to stand next to Petra in the kitchen and said, very quietly, "She doesn't actually see me, does she? She sees a project." Petra crouched down to her level. "I see you," she said. "I know," Josie said. "That's what I'm comparing it to." Bennett, who had walked in to get a glass of water, heard all of this from the hallway. He stood very still. Later, after Camille had gone and Josie was in bed, Bennett poured himself a drink and sat in the kitchen, which was the room in the suite that somehow felt most like the actual apartment and least like a hotel. Petra was wiping down the counter. They had not yet developed the habit of talking to each other at the end of the day, but it was starting to build itself, the way habits do when 2 people share space and stop pretending they aren't both tired. "She's not wrong," he said. Petra didn't pretend to not know what he meant. "No. Josie has a very accurate read on people. She said she was comparing it to you." Petra kept wiping the counter. "She's 7. She's just figuring out what genuine attention feels like. She shouldn't have to figure that out." "No," Petra said simply. "She shouldn't." He looked at her. She was looking at the counter. There was something careful about her tonight, more so than usual, and he filed it away without knowing quite what to do with it. "The job situation," he said. "Is it working for you?" "The arrangement." Petra put down the cloth. She turned to look at him with that level expression. "It's working," she said. "Josie is. She's an extraordinary kid. I want to do right by her. And the rest of it?" She seemed to be deciding something. "The rest of it is fine," she said, and went to get her book. The thing that cracked the arrangement open was not dramatic. It arrived quietly on a Thursday afternoon, in the form of a phone call that Petra took in the hallway, her voice dropping low enough that Josie, watching a documentary about marine invertebrates in the living room, couldn't hear. Bennett was working in his study and heard almost none of it except the last part, because she said it very still and very flat, the way people talk when they are holding a lot of weight. "I told you not to call this number. I said I'd handle it. Don't call again." He went back to his laptop. He told himself it was none of his business. 2 days later, a man appeared at the hotel's front desk asking for Petra Voss by name. The front desk called Fran. Fran called Bennett. Bennett went downstairs. The man was somewhere in his 40s, expensive shoes, the kind of easy posture that comes from a lifetime of being accommodated. He introduced himself as Devin Crane and said he was an old friend of Petra's. Bennett looked at him. "She's not available," Bennett said. "I just need 5 minutes. We have some unfinished business." "She said don't call," Bennett said, because he had heard her say exactly that. "I'd assume that extends to showing up." Devin Crane looked at him with the mild surprise of a man who is rarely told no by other men. She told you about me? No, Bennett said. But she also didn't seem happy to hear from you. So, I think you can go. Crane left. Bennett went back upstairs. He found Petra in the kitchen, helping Josie make grilled cheese, and said nothing about it. It was Josie who noticed something was different. Petra, your hands are shaky, she said, peering at the sandwich with scientific interest. Little bit, Petra said. Is someone being mean to you? Nothing I can't handle, kiddo. Josie looked at her. Dad's good at making mean people leave, she said, with the matter-of-fact authority of someone reporting observable fact. He made Mr. Harkins from the third-floor conference room go away, and nobody liked Mr. Harkins. Petra looked up then, caught Bennett's eye across the kitchen. He lifted one shoulder, not quite a shrug. I know, she said quietly. That night, after Josie was asleep, Petra came and knocked on the doorframe of his study. He waved her in. She stood there for a moment and then sat down across from his desk, which was something she'd never done. Devin Crane, she said. You don't have to. I know I don't. She looked at the desk, then at him. We were together for 3 years. I was 24 when I met him. He was very certain. About everything. About who I was, who I'd be, what I was worth. It took me a long time to understand that his certainty wasn't actually about me. She paused. When I left, he didn't take it well. It's been 2 years. He still shows up. Bennett said nothing for a moment. He has no claim on you. No, she said. He doesn't seem to have gotten that memo. He won't be back, Bennett said. And his voice had the particular quality it had when he was making a statement about how things were going to be. Petra looked at him. Something in her face, not softening exactly, but shifting, the way a door shifts when someone takes their weight off the other side. You don't have to do that, she said. I run this hotel, he said. He asked for you by name at my front desk. I can absolutely handle that. I know you can, she said. That's not what I meant. He didn't fully understand until she'd already gone to bed. What she meant was, you don't have to want to. The 2 weeks came and went. He offered a month. She said yes. His father called during the 3rd week and said he'd heard Bennett had hired a hotel cleaner as a nanny, and was that true? And Bennett said yes. And his father said that was exactly the kind of thing that ended up in the wrong columns, and Bennett said, Josie's happy. I'm going to go, and hung up, which he had not done to his father since he was 19. In the 4th week, Camille came back. She arrived unannounced, which was something she did because she had learned, over 4 dinners, that Bennett responded to persistence, and she had not yet understood that there is a difference between productive persistence and something else entirely. She came at 7 in the evening while Josie was still awake, carrying flowers and wine and the slightly theatrical warmth of someone who has rehearsed. Josie opened the door, looked at the flowers, looked at Camille, and said, We have flowers. Petra got them from the farmer's market because she said the ones from the lobby arrangements were too formal. Camille smiled the way she smiled at things Josie said, briefly, above her. How sweet. Is your dad home? And Petra? Josie said, stepping back to let her in. Petra was at the kitchen table working through a math worksheet with Josie. They'd apparently been mid-session and looked up when Camille came in. The 2 women looked at each other. It was only a second, but it was a very full second. I didn't know you had plans, Camille said to Bennett, who had appeared from the hallway. I didn't, he said. Josie has homework. It's just math, Camille said, putting her wine down on the kitchen counter. I'm sure she can take a break. Come sit with us, sweetheart. Josie looked at the worksheet. She looked at Petra. She looked at Camille. I want to finish the fractions, Josie said. Something crossed Camille's face. Not anger exactly, but the precursor to it, a kind of bright, controlled irritation. Your dad and I haven't seen each other in almost 2 weeks. I think the math can wait. You told me, Petra said to Josie, calm as water, that you wanted to get to the last problem tonight because you were going to show your class tomorrow. I did, Josie said, and picked up her pencil. Camille turned to Petra with a smile that had too many edges. She'll be fine on her own for a few minutes. You could take a break too. I'm good, Petra said, and helped Josie with a problem. Camille turned to Bennett. Something in her expression expected him to sort this out in her favor. He looked at his daughter bent over her worksheet, her tongue slightly out the way it was when she was concentrating, Petra's hand pointing to something on the page, Josie nodding. Camille, he said, this isn't a great time. The silence was very thorough. I see, she said, with a quietness that had a lot of volume in it. She left without the wine. Bennett stood in the kitchen for a moment. Josie didn't look up. Petra didn't look up. The apartment held its breath. Last problem, Josie said, is a really hard one. Show me, Petra said. Bennett sat down at the table. Me too, he said. Josie looked at him. You already know fractions, Dad. Refresh me. Something warm moved through the kitchen, quiet and unannounced, the way the best things tend to. It was Fran who finally said something. She came into his office on a Monday morning with his schedule and said, with the particular efficiency of someone delivering a memo they have been composing for a while. For what it's worth, which I know you may not have asked for. Josie has gained 4 pounds and started sleeping through the night since Petra arrived. Her teacher emailed last week to say she's participating in class for the first time this year. I have kept track of these things because someone has to. Bennett looked at her. That's all, Fran said, and put the schedule on his desk. He thought about it for the rest of the day. He thought about it in the car going to dinner with 2 board members who wanted to discuss the Dallas acquisition. He thought about it when he got home and the apartment was quiet because Josie was already asleep, and Petra was in the kitchen with a cup of tea and her worn paperback, and she looked up when he came in and said, "Good dinner? Productive," he said. "Different things," she noted. He sat down across from her, which was not something he had done before. She watched him with that level expression and waited. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, including if the honest answer is inconvenient for me." "All right," she said. "Do you want to leave?" She looked at him. "No," she said. "Josie," he said. "Both," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to do this carefully," he said. "I'm not. I've been told I operate mostly on logistics." "I know," she said, without unkindness. "The arrangement we have is professional," she said. "I was going to say insufficient," he said. She looked at him very steadily. "Bennett." It was the first time she had used his first name and they both noticed it. "I have a lot of complicated feelings about this situation," she said. "Because Josie is," she stopped. "If I'm here because you want me here and then I'm not here, she doesn't just lose a nanny. You understand that?" "I understand that," he said. "And I have a history," she said, "with men who were certain, who made promises that were actually just versions of what they needed." "I know. You can't know yet," she said. "That's the whole problem." He sat with that. It was not how he usually conducted conversations. He was a man who moved toward solutions and closed gaps. But she was right, and he knew she was right, and so instead of closing the gap, he said, "Then we go slowly." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not relief, not surrender, more like someone checking whether the ground will hold. "Slowly," she said. "Yes." She picked up her book, but she didn't open it right away. They sat in the kitchen for a while, in a silence that had changed shape, and he found that he was not uncomfortable in it. 2 days later, Josie announced at breakfast that she needed a sugar cookie the size of her face for a school project on things that make you feel better. Petra said that was almost certainly not a real assignment. Josie said it was a personal research project. Petra said that was different from a school project. Josie said the two overlapped more than adults understood. They ended up making cookies together, all 3 of them, on a Sunday afternoon when Bennett had blocked his calendar for no particular reason he'd named out loud. Josie stood on a step stool and used a cookie cutter shaped like a stegosaurus. Petra was teaching her how to ice them without flooding the edges. Bennett was in charge of not burning the second batch, which he managed on his 3rd try. "Dad," Josie said, drawing a careful line of white icing down her dinosaur's spine. "Are you and Petra going on a date, Josie?" Petra began. "Because Winston at school says when grown-ups stand close together in the kitchen they're either fighting or in love, and you two are not fighting." "Who's Winston?" Bennett asked. "He's in my class. He's very wise about adults. His parents fight in the kitchen a lot, so he has a lot of data." Bennett looked at Petra. Petra looked at her cookie. "We're figuring things out," Bennett said. "What's there to figure out?" Josie asked, with the exasperated logic of someone for whom the answer was very obvious. "You like each other. I like both of you. That's 3 people. That's a family math problem and the answer is clear." Petra laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a deflecting laugh. It was a real one, sudden and bright, the kind that surprised her, and Bennett watched it happen and felt something in him settle into place. It's like a bone finding the right socket. "Josie," Petra said, when she'd gotten herself together, You're going to be a terrible negotiator someday because you skip all the steps." "I know," Josie said serenely. "That's my strategy. It works." The cookie for the Stegosaurus received 7 additional spots of icing that it did not strictly need. Bennett ate the burned one from the first batch and said it was his favorite. Josie caught him and called it charity, and he said it was quality control, and they argued about this for 10 minutes, while Petra iced dinosaurs and did not say a word, but smiled at the counter the entire time. His father called that evening. Bennett answered, which he'd been doing less of. His father said he'd heard about the nanny situation from someone who'd been at the hotel, that people were talking, that this was not the image of the Aldridge family, that "Her name is Petra," Bennett said. "She was a classroom aide before she worked here. She has a letter from a parent that says she was the first person their son ever trusted. Josie sleeps through the night now. She's participating in school. She's happy." He paused. "I'm happy. I'm going to go," his father said. "Bennett, be serious." "I am being serious," Bennett said. "That's the point." He hung up and went back to the kitchen where Josie was showing Petra a book about deep-sea creatures, pointing to a photograph of an anglerfish with the focused intensity of someone presenting evidence. "It makes its own light," Josie was explaining. "In the darkest place in the ocean, it just decides to glow. I think that's the bravest thing." Petra was looking at the photograph. "I think so too," she said. Bennett stood in the doorway and did not say anything, because some moments explain themselves. Weeks passed. The kind of weeks that don't feel like time passing so much as life assembling itself around something real. Josie started teaching Petra the names of every dinosaur with an accuracy that impressed both of them, and Petra started teaching Josie how to write letters, real ones, on paper, to anyone who had been kind to her. The first one went to Fran. The second went to the building's weekend doorman, Harold, who had once helped Josie retrieve a bouncy ball that rolled under a car, and who she apparently considered a personal hero. Devin Crane did not come back. Bennett had made a call that he did not explain to Petra in detail, but she found out from Fran, who mentioned it in passing, and that evening she said, "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." It was the first time she'd thanked him for something he'd done, rather than something he'd provided, and he understood that she was marking the difference. On a Sunday in late May, they were in Millennium Park. Josie had requested it with the strategic specificity of someone who had planned an outing, and Josie ran ahead to a fountain and turned around to make sure they were both watching. They were. "She does that," Bennett said. "Checks that you're still there." "I know," Petra said. "I do the same thing." He looked at her. She was watching Josie with the particular expression she had sometimes. Not professional, not performative, something wide open and unguarded. The look of someone who has found something they didn't realize they were missing. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't pull away. Josie, who had eyes in the back of her head, shouted from the fountain, "It's about time." A woman on a nearby bench laughed. A man walking a dog smiled. Bennett felt the particular warmth of something small and true landing in the middle of a perfectly ordinary afternoon. "I told you," Josie announced, splashing back toward them, sneakers soaked through entirely. "Family math. It was obvious from the start. You're going to ruin your shoes," Bennett said. "I accept the consequence," Josie said, and took both their hands and swung herself between them, feet lifting off the ground, and laughed so hard the pigeons scattered. 3 months later, his father flew in from Scottsdale for what he had announced was a business meeting and turned out to be something else. He arrived at the hotel suite at 6 in the evening and found Josie explaining to Petra why Ankylosaurus had better armor than Stegosaurus, and Petra arguing, apparently with genuine investment, that the Stegosaurus had psychological advantages. Gerald Aldridge stood in the doorway of his son's hotel suite and watched this for approximately 45 seconds before Josie spotted him. "Grandpa Gerald," she announced, and ran to hug him. "We're arguing about dinosaurs. You have to pick a side." He looked at her. He looked at Petra, who had stood and was watching him with the steady, unimpressed expression he had heard about secondhand, and was now encountering directly. "I'll take Stegosaurus," he said after a moment. Josie pumped her fist. "Yes, Grandpa knows." Bennett came in from the hall where he'd been on a call and found his father in his kitchen, at his kitchen table, being walked through the relative merits of armored dinosaurs by his daughter. Petra was making tea. His father looked like a man who had arrived at a place expecting to find a problem, and found instead a Sunday evening. Later, when Josie was in bed and Petra had given them space, Gerald sat across from his son with a cup of tea he hadn't asked for and said, "She made me tea. She does that. She didn't ask if I wanted it." "She knew you'd want it," Bennett said. Gerald looked at the cup. He looked at the doorway through which Petra had gone. "She stood up to you," Gerald said. "Not a question." "She stood up to me," Bennett confirmed. "Good," his father said quietly. "Someone should have years ago." Bennett looked at him. "I'm not apologizing," Gerald said, who was not a man for apologies. "But I'm here. If that means something." "It means something," Bennett said. The next morning, Gerald Aldridge sat at the kitchen table while Josie made him taste test 3 different kinds of jam on toast and gave each one a score out of 10 with the thoroughness of a peer-reviewed study. Petra came in, saw the scene, and put a fresh pot of coffee on without being asked. Gerald watched her move through the kitchen like she belonged there, because she did. When Bennett asked her, 6 months after that Sunday in Millennium Park, it was not elaborate. He was not a man for elaborate. He was in the kitchen. Theirs now, he thought of it that way. And Josie was at school and the morning was quiet, and he put a cup of coffee in front of her and sat across from her and said, "I'd like to keep doing this." Petra wrapped both hands around the mug. "The coffee? All of it," he said. "You and Josie and the burned cookies and the arguments about dinosaurs and the fractions and all of it. Permanently, if you want." She looked at him across the table with those level gray eyes, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was the most honest person he had ever encountered. "Yes," she said. When Josie came home from school and found out, she stood in the kitchen doorway in her backpack and her dinosaur sneakers and said, with enormous dignity, "I would like the record to show that I called this in week 1. "Noted," Petra said. "I expect credit," Josie said. "You'll get full credit," Bennett said. She thought about this. "I want it in writing," she said. "Witnessed by Fran, she's a notary." Petra made the noise she made when she was trying very hard not to laugh. "Deal," Bennett said, and pulled his daughter in, and reached across for Petra's hand, and the kitchen filled up with the particular golden light of a late afternoon in May that none of them would later be able to describe very precisely, but all 3 of them would remember for the rest of their lives. The moment the family math finally, completely, added up.